It has been so long since we have read.
It has. So are we right where I left?
No. And by so long,
It's only been like a week.
I mean it's been since last week Wednesday.
I haven't even been what grade about that. Oh,
Shh. But that's a long time. So Salva has been waiting to be able to go to where? America. And what they do is they have like this long interview process for the refugees to go. What? Yes. So they have this long interview process that they have to go through. And one day he found out that his name is on the list. In Naya's story, they had gotten the water to start running, but there was something wrong with the water. Do you remember? It was really muddy. Okay. All right, chapter 15. Southern Sudan, 2009. Even though the water springing out of the borehole was brown and muddy, some of the little boys wanted a drink right away, but their mothers held them back. The men kept on working with the drill. Their leader talked to Naya's uncle and father and some of the other village men. Later, Depp explained things to her. "Don't worry," he said. "The water is muddy because it's still mixed with the old water that they were using from the pond. They have to drill farther down to make sure of getting deep enough into the good, clean water underground. And then they have to put in the pipes and make a foundation with the gravel and then install the pump and pour the cement around it, and the cement has to dry." It could be several more days before they could drink the water, Depp said. Naya sighed and picked up a big plastic can. Yet another walk to the pond. Nairobi, Kenya, Rochester, New York, 1996. The Lost Boys. That was what they were being called in America. The boys who had lost their homes and families because of the war and had wandered lost for weeks or months at the time before reaching the refugee camps. The aid worker explained this to Salva and the 8 other boys who would be traveling with that he would be traveling with. The woman spoke mostly English. Sometimes she said a word or two in Arabic, but she did not speak that language well. She tried her best to speak slowly, but she had many things to tell them, and Salva worried that he might misunderstand something important. The road in the truck from the IFO refugee camp to the processing center in Nairobi, the capital city of Kenya, endless forms. They rode in a truck from the IFO refugee camp to a processing center in Nairobi, the capital city of Kenya. Endless forms had to be filled out. Their photos were taken. There was a medical examination. It was all a blur to Salva, for he was too excited to sleep, which made him too tired to grasp everything that was happening. But there was one clear moment when he was given new clothes. In the camp, he had worn an old pair of shorts and an even older t-shirt. He had taken good care of them as he could, but there were holes in the shirt and the waistband of the shorts were stretched out and threadbare. The camp workers handed out clothing whenever donations came in, but there were never enough clothes for those who needed them. Now, Salva's arms were piled high with new clothes: underwear, socks, sneakers, a pair of long pants, a t-shirt, and a long-sleeve shirt to wear on top of it. And he was to wear all these clothes at the same time? "It's winter in America," the aid worker said. "Winter?" Salva repeated. "Yes, very cold. You will be given more clothes in New York." "More clothes?" Salva shook his head. "How can I possibly wear any more clothes?" He thinks he has to wear them all at once. Like all the clothes that he's going to get in America, he thinks he needs to wear.
Underwear, pants.
Salva could hardly believe his eyes when he boarded the plane in Nairobi. Every person had a seat, and they all had luggage too. With all these people, hundreds of heavy padded chairs, and all these bags, how would the plane ever get off the ground? Can you imagine what's going through Salva's head right now? His mind is blown. Somehow, it did. Not like a bird lifting off lightly with quick flapping of wings, but with shrieks and roars from the engine as the plane lumbered down the long runway, as if it had to try as hard as it could to get into the air. Once the plane was safely aloft, Salva stared at the scene outside the small window. The world was so big, yet everything in it was so small. Huge forests and deserts became mere patches of green and brown. Cars crawled along the roads like ants in a line. And there were people down there, thousands of them, but he could not see a single one. Would you like a drink? Salva looked up at the woman in her neat uniform and shook his head to show that he did not understand. She smiled. Coca-Cola? Orange juice? Coca-Cola? Long ago, Salva's father had once brought a few bottles of Coca-Cola back from his trip to the market. Salva's first taste had been startling, all those bubbles jumping around in his mouth. What a rare treat it had been. Coca-Cola, thank you, Salva said, and with each sip he remembered his family passing the bottles from hand to hand, laughing at the tickly bubbles, sharing and laughing together. Yes.
Is this your family still with him?
Nope.
So I thought his father was.
Nope. He is the only. No. He is the. Yep. He is the only one left in his family. His father or his uncle, or his family was never with him, but his uncle was shot by people for his gun.
Then they went boom, boom, boom.
Boom, boom.
The journey to Salva's new home required not one, not two, but 3 planes. The first plane flew from Nairobi to Frankfurt in a country called Germany. It landed with an alarming thump, then braked so hard that Salva was thrown forward in his seat and strapped across his stomach. The strap across his stomach caught him hard. He took a second plane from Frankfurt to New York City. It too landed abruptly, but this time Salva was ready and he held tightly to the armrests. In New York City, the aid worker led the boys to a different gate. Some would be taking the final leg of their trip alone, while others were in groups of 2 or 3. Salva was the only one going to Rochester. The aid worker said that his new family would be waiting for him there. On the plane to Rochester, most of the passengers were men traveling on their own, but there were some women too, and a few families, mothers and fathers and children. Most of the people were white. Beginning in the airport in Frankfurt, Salva had seen more white people in the last few hours than he had seen before in his whole lifetime. He tried not to stare, but he couldn't help studying the families closely. Thoughts kept looping through his mind. What if my family isn't there? What if they have changed their mind? What if they meet me and don't like me? Salva took a deep breath. One step at a time, he reminded himself. Just this flight to get through for now. The plane landed at last, its wheels screeching, while Salva gripped the armrest and braced himself for what was to come. There they were, smiling and waving in the airport lobby. His new family. Chris the father, Louise the mother, and 4 children. Salva would have siblings, just as he had before. He felt his shoulders relax a little on seeing their eager smiles. Salva said hello and thank you many times, for in his fatigue and confusion, these were the only words he felt sure about. He could not understand what anyone was saying, especially Louise, who spoke so quickly that at first he was not sure she was even speaking English. And yes, they did have more clothes for him. A big puffy jacket, a hat, a scarf, gloves. He put on the jacket and zipped it up. The sleeves were so bulky that he felt as if he couldn't move his arms properly. He wondered if he looked very foolish now with his body and arms so fat and his legs so thin. But none of the family laughed at him, and he soon noticed that they were all wearing the same kind of jacket. The glass doors of the airport terminal slid open. The frigid air hit Salva's face like a slap. Never had he felt such cold before. In the part of Africa where he had lived all his life, the temperature rarely dropped below 70 degrees. When he inhaled, he thought his lungs would surely freeze solid and stop working, but all around him, people were still walking and talking and moving about. Apparently, it was possible to survive in such cold temperatures, and now he understood the need for the awkward padded jacket. Salva stood still inside the terminal doors for a few moments. Leaving the airport felt like leaving his old life forever. Sudan, his family, his village. Tears came to his eyes, perhaps from the cold air blowing in through the open doors. His new family was already outside. They turned and looked back at him. Salva blinked away the tears and took his first steps into a new life in America. Can you just, we have lived in Wisconsin our whole life, most of us, right? Can you imagine seeing snow for the first time and feeling winter for the first time?
And not being born.
How many of you remember feeling winter for the first time? You don't. You remember?
Like
Oh.
I remember like coming off the plane from Florida.
Oh. So it almost probably felt like the first time, but at least you knew it was coming.
Yeah, we always go in the winter because Christmas break.
Yeah. Get out of the
I can
cold.
relate to that. You go in